Disclaimer. This book may contain content that is considered historically inaccurate or culturally insensitive by modern standards. My hope is that by exploring old literature, we will better understand why people of the past thought the way that they did and understand the influences that shape their culture. This video is not intended for young audiences. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I will be reading to you from Out of Door book, which is the 7th book in a series or collection of books called The Children's Hour, published by Houghton Mifflin Co. in 1907. The Baby Robin by Olive Thorne Miller. Ever since I read somewhere a charming sketch of a tame robin named Bob, all robins have been Bob or Bobby to me. So when a baby of the family came into my birdroom to spend the winter, his name was all ready for him. Bobby he became from that minute. That he was a baby I knew partly by his youthful ways, and partly by the fact that he had not entirely put off the spotted bib which marks the infancy of the thrush. He was a knowing youngster, however. He had his own opinions, and never hesitated to speak his mind, though I could not always understand him. The robin had no notion of losing his interest in life and the world around him because fate had decreed that he should live in a house. On the contrary, he seemed as much interested and as eager to know the strange things that went on inside our walls as we are to observe the manners of the foreign folk whose homes we visit. The doings of the people thus suddenly become his neighbors he studied with curiosity. But one thing in his new world he was already familiar with, and that was the birds. He realized at once that he must make and keep his place among them, and he proceeded to do this the moment he learned how to go in and out of his own particular apartment in that strange new place. He had some difficulty at first, because the door to his cage was rather low, as cage doors are apt to be, and he stood up so straight that he passed it 40 times before he saw there was a door, and that it was wide open. He had to stoop a little to go out. The part of the room that the robin at once claimed as his own private promenade was across the tops of 2 large cages, which stood side by side on a shelf, one being his own, and he made it part of his daily duty to see that no one trespassed upon it. Woe to the unlucky bluebird or oriole who dared set foot on that sacred spot. Down upon him instantly came Master Bobby with fury in his eye, so big and bustling in manner that no one was brave enough to stay and face him. No one, did I say? I must except one, a little Baltimore oriole, who was ragged and tailless, but so bold and saucy that I shall tell her story in another paper. Another duty the robin took upon himself, to assist me in seeing that every bird in the room had his daily outing. Soon after the cage doors were opened in the morning, Bobby looked around, and if he saw any of the feathered folk who lingered by the food cup and did not take advantage of their privilege, he went at once to attend to it. His manner of effecting this purpose was completely successful. He simply pounced upon the top of a cage and carried on such pranks over the head of the bird within that he was glad to fly out and leave the cage to the enemy. The robin cared nothing for the cage, however. He merely wanted to drive its tenant out, and the moment that was done he went his way. It may appear strange that, being a robin and consequently fond of the ground, Bobby did not lay claim to the floor of his new territory. He did desire to do so, but there was a slight difficulty in the way. Another claimant was ahead of him, and one who looked well able to maintain his ground, a blue jay. Against all others in the room, the robin did defend the floor, always rushing up to see what was wanted when any bird ventured to alight on the matting. The blue jay was too big to take liberties with, and he became an object of the greatest interest to the young robin. The jay was himself little more than a baby, who had lived with people from the nest, and was therefore quite used to a house. In fact, he knew no other home, and Bobby watched everything he did with a sort of admiring awe, as we have all seen a little boy watch the performances of a big boy. And then there is a section break, and I will continue. When the blue jay was hopping about the floor, busy with his own affairs, which were always of the utmost importance, in his opinion, the robin often stood on a low table or chair, and looked at him, following every movement with deep concern. If the jay devoted himself to some particular thing, like hammering a nut, and went to the round of a chair to do it, his admirer came as near as he thought safe on the floor, and observed the operation closely. Sometimes, after looking on for a while, the robin, too, hunted about for a plaything, and brought a match, a pin, or a bit of nutshell that he picked up on the floor, and laid it before the jay, as if to challenge him to a frolic. Whatever was his intention, the jay was far too busy a personage to play. His life was full of serious duties, and he never accepted the invitation. One thing the blue jay persisted in doing that was almost too much for Bobby to endure. That was taking his bath first. The two birds used the same broad, shallow dish on the floor, and when the jay got possession, the robin would dance around in a circle, running and hopping as near as he could without being spattered, quite frantic to go in. But his big rival was specially fond of a good soaking himself, and he often kept Bobby waiting some time. When at last the way was open, Bobby rushed into the water, stepping upon the edge of the dish with one foot as a human being would do, and taking his turn at a soak. On coming out, he found himself nearly dry, hopping about the floor and beating violently, sometimes one wing, sometimes both wings. He had, too, a curious fancy for coming upon a small stand near me to dress his plumage. It was not at all a good place, for there was no perch to cling to while he twisted round to bloom himself, but it was his choice, and he insisted on coming there, though when he tried to reach his tail feathers, his feet slipped, and he turned round and round like a kitten chasing its own tail, making a laughable show of himself. The robin baby, like others of his age, was fond of play. A favorite game was to run across the two cages he considered his own, and, at the end, jump heavily on the paper cover of a smaller cage a foot away. Of course, the first bounce sent the owner out in a hurry, and then Bobby ran and jumped till he was tired of it. Another way he had of amusing himself was by trying to pull out the ends of strings that hung loose where the matting was joined. One of these was always irresistible to the bird. He seized it in his beak and pulled and tugged at it so hard that he was often jerked off his feet. The fact that he never got one out did not discourage him in the least. He was always ready to attack another when he found it. A string was his great delight. He dragged it about and worried it as he did a worm. It sometimes got him into trouble. On one occasion he found a long piece of thread, and before I noticed him, had so tangled it around one leg and foot that he could not spread his toes, nor, of course, stand on that foot, and he was very much frightened. I could not catch him while he was out in the room without scaring him still more, and he worked at it himself a long time before he went into his cage. As soon as he did that, I caught him and cut off the thread with scissors, though it was so twisted around that I had to cut 15 or 20 times before it came off. Bobby showed the common sense for which his family is noted by submitting quietly as soon as he understood that I was trying to help him, and letting that leg hang down while the other was held up. A newspaper on the floor always furnished the robin with much entertainment. After jerking it about and lifting it to peer under the edge, he would pounce into the middle, peck a hole, and then seize the edge of the opening and tear the paper into strips. The tearing sound always startled him and sent him off, as it does nearly every bird, but the fun of doing it was so great that he always came back and did it again. One trouble came into the life of my robin that for weeks made him very unhappy. It was a feather in one wing, of which the feathery part was missing, torn off apparently. This he plainly considered a disgrace to any robin. Birds are very sensitive about the condition of their plumage, and he determined to pull it out. He worked at it many hours, but for some reason could not dislodge it. But he did succeed in making himself very miserable about it, and I was glad that spring and the time of his freedom was near. As that magical season came on, Bobby grew restless and worked off his superfluous energy on his roommates. He chased the birds about. He made war on a shy tanager. He performed war dances on the cages. He tried to put an end to all quiet life. In fact, he became so troublesome in my little colony that I was glad, on the first warm day, to take the robin, a baby no longer, out to the country and bid him farewell. And that is the end of The Baby Robin by Olive Thorne Miller. Thank you for listening to this story with me. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you have a great day. Bye!